Welcome to the deep dive. So today, we're going to tackle a pretty big question in baseball. Like, what actually makes a team successful?
Hmm.
I mean, is it all about racking up the runs, or is it about those W's in the win column?
Well, it's a lot trickier than it might seem at first glance.
Right.
You can definitely have teams that score a ton of runs, but still somehow end up on the losing side more often than not.
Yeah, and that's actually what led us to this deep dive, the 1960 World Series.
Yeah.
You had the Yankees scoring a crazy 55 runs, right?
Wow.
And the Pirates only had 27. Yet the Pirates still walked away with the series win. How is that even possible?
Yeah, it seems completely counterintuitive, but it really underscores the need to dig a little deeper, go beyond just those basic run totals.
Okay, so walk me through this. I mean, the Yankees had a run differential of plus 28. That's huge.
It is, and statistically speaking, that kind of run differential should translate to about 5.5 wins over a series like that.
Right.
But as we all know, they only won 3 games, so something else is going on here.
So how do sabermetricians even approach this kind of situation? I mean, it seems like the Yankees were clearly the better scoring team, but the Pirates were the ones celebrating at the end.
Well, there are generally 2 main camps when it comes to analyzing these kinds of head-scratchers. One camp, and I think this is where a lot of fans instinctively land, is all about those runs.
Yep.
They'd argue that the Yankees just got unlucky, or maybe that the Pirates' pitching was somehow clutch, even though they were giving up all those runs.
Right, yeah. Runs are a pretty tangible thing, They're right there on the scoreboard.
Exactly.
But what about that other side of the argument?
Well, that camp really puts the focus on winning no matter what it takes to get there.
Hmm.
Now, Bill James, considered by many to be the godfather of sabermetrics, you know him, right?
Of course.
Yeah, well, he developed a system called win shares, and it tries to break down how much each player on a team contributed to actually winning games.
Okay. Interesting approach. So how does that system handle a team that puts up tons of runs but still ends up losing?
Well, that's where things get a bit more complex. James uses something called runs per win. Basically, it adjusts for the fact that just because you score a lot of runs doesn't automatically mean you're going to win a lot of games.
Huh. So are we saying that like a run scored in a 10-0 blowout is somehow less valuable than a run scored in a nail-biter 1-0 win?
Not necessarily. The point is more that simply totaling up all the runs a team scores doesn't tell the whole story, and that's kind of the issue Tom Tango, aka Tango Tiger, has with Bill James's method.
Yeah, Tango Tiger. Of course, our guide for this deep dive. He's a pretty prominent voice in the sabermetrics world. So what's his main critique of Bill James?
Well, Tango Tiger argues that while James claims to prioritize wins in his system, it ends up treating all runs equally. Whether they happened in a win or a loss, they count the same.
Okay, hold on. Let me see if I understand this. So if a player hits a grand slam in a game, their team ends up losing by a huge margin. Those 4 runs count the same as if they hit that same grand slam in a close game that their team won.
You got it. And Tango Tiger sees that as a problem because it doesn't really capture the actual impact of those runs on the game's outcome and ultimately on the series as a whole.
Yeah, that's a good point. It seems like context really matters here. If you're trying to assess how much a player helped their team win, you can't just look at their stats in isolation. You got to consider when and how those stats actually led to wins.
Right. Imagine a basketball player who scores 30 points, but his team still loses.
Yeah.
Is he as valuable as a player who scores 20 points but carries his team to victory? The box score might make the first guy look better, but the full story is much more nuanced.
This is why I love these deep dives. It's so easy to get caught up in the surface level, but there's always so much more beneath the surface. I'm starting to see why this debate about runs versus wins is so heated. It really gets to the heart of what we value in sports. Is it about individual brilliance, even in a losing effort? Or is it about doing whatever it takes to contribute to the team's success?
That's a great way to frame it. So where does Tango Tiger land on all of this? I mean, he's clearly got issues with both the runs-focused approach and with James's emphasis on wins. Does he offer a solution?
Yeah, I'm curious too.
Well, he believes the key lies in analyzing performance on a game-by-game basis.
Okay.
Instead of simply focusing on total runs scored, he wants to look at how players performed within the context of each individual game. So those Yankee blowout wins, the 12-0, 10-0, and 16-3 games,
Yeah.
those could actually be distorting the picture when it comes to individual performance. It's not just about how many runs they scored in those games, but how those runs affected the final outcome.
So the million-dollar question is, how do we balance the value of runs and the importance of wins.
Right.
I mean, focusing solely on runs feels like an oversimplification,
It does.
but putting all the emphasis on wins might lead us to undervalue a player who puts up big numbers but doesn't always end up on the winning side.
Absolutely. And that's exactly the tension we're going to be unpacking as we continue to explore this 1960 World Series case study. We'll be looking at how some key players performed game by game and see if we can start to untangle this whole runs versus wins puzzle.
I can't wait. This is going to be good.
Yeah, this is a fun one.
Okay, so we've talked a lot about this debate in baseball, but I'm curious, how does this whole runs versus wins thing, how does it play out in, like, your own life?
Oh, that's a great question. I think it really gets at how we define success in general, right?
Right.
Like, think about it. Are there times when you're so focused on winning, whatever that means for you, getting that promotion, closing that big deal, even just winning an argument that you might be missing the bigger picture?
Oh, yeah, totally. It's
Yeah.
easy to get caught up in those short-term wins,
Right.
but then what if you're, like, burning bridges along the way
Right.
or
Well,
sacrificing your well-being?
Mm.
It's kind of like scoring all those runs in a game, but still ending up with the L, right? Might look good on paper, but it doesn't actually move you forward in any meaningful way.
Exactly. And I think the key here, just like in baseball, is figuring out what winning actually means to you.
Okay.
Are you chasing external validation like awards and recognition?
Yeah.
Or are you more driven by internal satisfaction like personal growth, strong relationships, making a positive impact on the world?
That's such a good point. It's so easy to compare ourselves to others, right?
It is.
And then measure our worth based on all these external markers of success. But maybe true success is more about aligning our actions with our values and pursuing goals that actually feel meaningful to us, regardless of whether they lead to, like, a traditional win in the eyes of others.
Absolutely. And that brings us back to the idea of using the right metrics, right?
Huh?
Like, are we measuring our progress in a way that actually aligns with what we truly value? Are we taking the time to celebrate those small victories along the way?
So it's not just about the goals we set, but it's also about how we measure our progress towards those goals.
Exactly. We got to make sure we're not so fixated on the destination that we forget to enjoy the journey? Yeah.
It's all about finding that balance between striving for excellence and being kind to ourselves along the way,
Yeah.
recognizing that setbacks and failures, those are all part of the process.
So maybe it's about finding joy in the pursuit itself, even if it doesn't always result in a win, at least not in the conventional sense.
I love that. Couldn't have said it better myself.
Okay, so we've talked about the big picture here, the whole idea of runs versus wins and what that means for us personally.
Right.
But let's bring it back to the 1960 World Series for a second.
Yeah, let's do it.
I mean, we've got all these abstract concepts, but this was a real series full of dramatic moments and some incredible performances.
Absolutely. We can't forget about the stories, right?
Right.
So picture this. Game 7, bottom of the ninth, the score is tied at 9. The tension is so thick you could cut it with a knife.
And then Bill Mazeroski, the Pirates shortstop, not exactly known for his power hitting, he steps up to the plate.
And boom, he launches this walk-off home run.
I get chills just thinking about it. It was incredible. The crowd goes wild. The Pirates win the World Series, and Mazeroski instantly becomes a legend.
Talk about a moment that defied all expectations. It really speaks to the beauty of baseball, how unpredictable it can be.
It does. It's not just about the numbers. It's about the human drama, the twists and turns, those improbable victories that make us question everything we thought we knew.
Yeah, it's those moments that make you fall in love with the game all over again.
Absolutely. And, I think there's a lesson there that extends beyond the baseball field. Sometimes life throws you a curveball, something you never saw coming.
It does.
And it's those moments, the ones that shake us out of our comfort zones and force us to adapt, those are often the most transformative.
So true. Okay, before we get too philosophical here, let's not forget about those game-by-game breakdowns.
Right.
The ones that Tango Tiger is so passionate about.
Absolutely. Let's take a closer look at some of those individual performances in the 1960 World Series and see what we can learn.
All right, so let's rewind to those Yankee blowout wins. The 12-0, the 10-0, and the 16-3 games. You were saying earlier that those games, even though they were huge wins, might be skewing our understanding of how individual players actually performed.
Right. They're perfect examples of why we can't just focus on total runs scored.
Hmm.
As impressive as those wins were, they don't tell us the whole story about how each player contributed to the series as a whole.
Yeah, because as we've been saying, a run scored in a blowout isn't necessarily as impactful as a run scored in a close game, one that really swings the momentum and ultimately helps seal the win.
You got it.
Right.
And that's why this game-by-game analysis is so important. We need to understand the context of those performances, right, to really appreciate how much they actually contributed to winning.
Yeah.
It's about going beyond those raw numbers and looking at the nuances of each game.
Okay, so let's get into those individual game performances then. When we look at the 1960 World Series, do we see any players whose performance might be viewed differently if we consider the context of each game? Like, did those blowouts really skew things?
Yeah, definitely. I think a great example is Mickey Mantle. I mean, he was the Yankees star player,
Right.
and he hit 4 homers in the series, which is amazing.
Yeah.
But 3 of those 4 came in those blowout wins.
So even though those home runs were impressive, they might not have actually been as crucial to the series outcome as, say, hitting them in a closer game.
Exactly. And then on the flip side, you have a guy like Bill Skowron.
Hmm.
He didn't have the flashy stats that Mantle had, but he consistently came through in clutch situations.
Okay.
He had key hits in several of the close games, the ones that really swung the series in the Pirates' favor.
So it sounds like this game-by-game analysis really challenges the narrative we might have going in. Who are the real heroes? Who really made the difference?
It does, and it reminds us that sometimes the players who shine the brightest aren't necessarily the ones with the biggest overall numbers. It's the guys who can deliver when it matters most, when the pressure is on.
I love that. It's all about those clutch moments. So what does this all mean for us? Like regular people, not baseball statisticians, who are trying to figure out how to measure success in our own lives.
I think the biggest lesson is that context really matters.
Hmm.
It's not just about hitting those home runs or racking up the RBIs.
Right.
It's about understanding how our actions, how our choices contribute to the bigger picture, the goals we're truly working towards.
So maybe it's not about just chasing individual wins, but making sure those wins are actually moving us in the right direction.
Yeah, exactly. And maybe, just maybe, it's about learning to find the joy in the process itself.
Okay.
The ups and downs, the moments of brilliance, and even the heartbreaks. Those are all part of what makes the journey so worthwhile.
It sounds like we've learned a lot today, not just about baseball and stats, but about how we think about success in all areas of life.
We did.
I mean, we challenged some of those old assumptions, explored the importance of context, and maybe even rediscovered the beauty of the game along the way.
And that's what the deep dive is all about, right? So until next time, keep questioning, keep exploring, and keep diving deep.